The calendar no one touched. The door creaked open with a resistance that didn't match the force behind the key, as if the apartment itself didn't want to be seen. A heavy silence spilled out from inside, curling into the hallway like fog-thick, unmoving. There was no scent of mold, no breeze, no sound of life. Just dust hanging in the air like frozen time, caught mid-motion in the sharp rays of sun slicing through a half-closed window. The walls, pale yellow once, were now a sickly beige. A coat abandoned on a hook. A coffee mug on the table, still faintly stained. The cushions on the couch flattened, as if someone had just stood up, and yet no one lived here. Not anymore. But in the kitchen bare, cold, clinical hung a single object that didn't match the rest. A calendar, flipped open to December 1995, untouched by the decay that swallowed the rest of the space. Clean, vibrant, pristine, as if it had been placed there yesterday. And on that calendar, under a red circle around December 12th, there was one handwritten word, all in capital letters. Bold, shaky, deliberate. Forgive. The word didn't make sense. Not immediately. Not in that room. Not against the silence. Who left it? Who were they asking forgiveness from? Or were they forgiving someone else? The refrigerator was unplugged, yet full. Expired milk dating back over a decade. Mail stacked by the door, unopened. Utility bills, yellowed with time, marked final notice. But nothing had been taken. No sign of a rushed exit. No luggage missing. No drawers rifled through. The television remote was placed neatly. The bed was made. It was like the apartment was abandoned in the middle of someone's breath left, not in panic, but in pause. A pause that lasted years. Whoever had lived here once never told anyone they were leaving, if they ever left at all. And if someone else had come back later, why hang that calendar? Why write just one word? Forgive. The landlord said no one had paid rent since 1996, but there were no eviction notices. No police reports. Just silence. A sealed space in the heart of the city, passed over, ignored, like a scar under a bandage no one wanted to peel off. Urban explorers found it by mistake. The door had been locked from the inside. They had to pry the hinges to get in. What they documented that day would slowly begin to unravel into something far stranger than an abandoned apartment. Because what followed wasn't just a story about an empty place. It was about a calendar that shouldn't exist, a tenant no one could trace, and a word that refused to disappear no matter how much time had passed. What you're about to uncover is not just about an empty apartment. It's about what we leave behind when words are the only thing that remains. The discovery, a calendar hanging in an empty apartment. They weren't looking for anything in particular. 3 explorers. 1 flashlight, 1 low-quality camcorder set to night mode. The kind of urban scavengers drawn not to danger, but to silence. Forgotten places, hidden echoes. They had mapped out a list of addresses in the city, said to be untouched since the early 90s. Most had already been scavenged: graffiti, mold, mattresses, beer bottles, signs that time hadn't been kind. But this one? This apartment? It wasn't on any of their lists. It had no broken windows, no warning signs. Just a rusted intercom and a door that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The building wasn't technically abandoned. Units above and below were rented, which made it even stranger. How does a single apartment in a lived-in building disappear? The door gave them more trouble than expected. Locked, bolted, no signs of forced entry from the outside. It took 20 minutes of quiet prying, whispered debate, and 1 screw slipped from the hinge for the door to finally give way. It opened inward with a reluctant groan, and what lay behind it felt less like a room and more like a sealed memory. It wasn't trashed. It wasn't looted. It wasn't dusty in the way you'd expect. The apartment felt preserved. There were no family photos on the walls, no children's drawings, no personal artifacts except for one framed painting above the sofa, an abstract swirl of blue and black. It gave nothing away, but the most eerie part? Nothing felt staged. There were still books on the shelf, a radio on the counter, a single spoon resting on a napkin, a mug with faded lipstick on its rim. These weren't set pieces. These were remnants of routine, of someone who lived here, who brewed coffee, who folded the same towel over the sink each night. It looked like someone had simply stepped out and never returned. It was only when one of them entered the kitchen that the calendar came into view, hanging slightly askew on a nail by the fridge. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but the date was wrong, very wrong. December 1995, pristine, white pages, unfaded. And there, circled in red pen, was one date, December 12th. Beneath it, written in bold, shaky letters, "Forgive." The word didn't fit the rest of the space. It wasn't part of the printed page. The pen stroke was jagged, pressed hard enough to nearly tear the paper. And yet, everything else in the kitchen was untouched. There were no additional notes, no scribbled appointments, no holidays highlighted. Just the word, as if it was never meant to be read by anyone but the person who wrote it. At first, they thought it was a joke, a staged scene. Maybe another explorer had been here and planted it. But there was dust on the calendar's top edge, not around the page, on it. A layer of fine dust settled so perfectly, it could only have happened after the word was written, which meant it had been there for years, undisturbed, unread, and no one ever cleaned it. No one ever returned. One of them, the one holding the camera, whispered something no one wanted to admit out loud. Who was this meant for? They turned off their flashlights and stood in silence. A floor above them, a pipe groaned. Then stillness again. They didn't touch anything. They didn't steal anything. They simply backed out, slowly, each step backward, like retreating from a grave. And when they reviewed the footage the next morning at home, far from that room, they noticed something that hadn't registered in person. As they panned away from the calendar, just for a second, the lens caught a reflection in the dark glass of the microwave. It looked like a shoulder, a person standing just behind the camcorder operator. But no one had been there. They rewound, paused, played, rewound again, and then they stopped watching. That apartment wasn't on their list anymore. It wasn't on any list at all. They never released the video. They never shared the footage publicly. But one of them, after months of silence, sent an anonymous tip to a local historian. Not the police, not a news station. A historian. Because something about that place didn't feel like a crime scene. It felt older, stranger, like it belonged in the archives, not in court. And the calendar? It was the only clue that anything had happened at all. What kind of person disappears and leaves only one word behind? Forgive, December 12th. The only marked date, December 12th. The only marked date. It wasn't just a day. It was the day. The only one circled on that otherwise pristine calendar. The only one someone thought was worth remembering, worth emphasizing, worth writing a single loaded word beneath. Forgive. The date, December 12th. The year, 1995. The questions were immediate. Why December? Why that specific day? Was it a birthday? A death? An anniversary? A deadline? A warning? They looked for patterns, starting with the obvious. In 1995, December 12th fell on a Tuesday. Not a holiday, not a weekend, not even the kind of date you'd expect to stand out. But for someone, it did. One of the explorers, after leaving the apartment and vowing not to return, found himself haunted by that date. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus. He began combing through archived newspapers from 1995, police records, local obituaries, hospital registries, and what he found wasn't a single event, but a convergence. That date had weight, quiet, scattered weight. On December 12, 1995, a woman named Eleanor Griggs, age 38, was reported missing just 5 blocks from that apartment. She was last seen leaving her therapist's office. Her file was marked, pending further investigation. But nothing further was ever filed. A man named Charles Fenwick, age 72, was found deceased in a nearby church locked from the inside. His death was ruled as natural causes, though the coroner's notes were vague. Signs of distress, rapid onset, possible emotional trauma. He had no history of heart problems. That same day, a child went missing on the west side of the city. Age 10, name withheld. She reappeared 48 hours later with no memory of where she'd been. She said one sentence over and over again for weeks. He said to forgive him. 3 separate incidents, 3 lives. No known connection. But the explorer couldn't let it go. He began to dig deeper into the symbolism of the date. December 12th to 12th, 12 mirrored numbers. In numerology, repeating numbers often signify alignment, moments of transformation, or spiritual thresholds. 12 is the number of completion. 12 months, 12 hours, 12 signs. But doubled, it suggests an echo, a reminder, a chance to revisit what wasn't finished. Was that what this calendar represented? A second chance? He also discovered something else. In ancient Catholic tradition, December 12th is the feast day of Our Lady of Guadalupe, a date often associated with forgiveness, mercy, and personal miracles. Not everyone observes it, but for those who do, it carries immense emotional weight, especially among those seeking healing or redemption. Was the person who left that calendar Catholic, or simply desperate for redemption? In the quiet apartment, nothing else pointed to faith. No crosses, no rosaries, no Bibles. But on the back of the calendar, faint and nearly invisible, there were traces of something scratched into the cardboard. The explorer held it up to the light and made out the letters. Please, let it end here. No date, no signature, just that. So now the calendar had 2 inscriptions, one public, one private, forgive, and please let it end here. What was supposed to end? Guilt? Pain? A cycle? Was it meant for someone who never came back? Or was the calendar a gravestone in disguise? The most chilling theory came from an anonymous comment left on a private online forum where the explorer had once posted details under a pseudonym. The user claimed they had seen a similar calendar once before, in a hospital room years ago, hung not for dates, but for ritual. Each year, the patient circled only one date, the date of a mistake they never spoke about. That patient took their own life on the same date in 1987, December 12th. The comment ended with, some people circle the day they broke. Others circle the day they plan to forgive themselves. Sometimes it's the same day, and with that, everything began to shift. What if the calendar wasn't a reminder? What if it was a memorial? Not of someone who disappeared, but someone who ended something within themselves, quietly, unseen, without ever opening the door again. The explorer printed out the calendar image, framed it, and hung it in his studio, not as decoration, but as a reminder of the one thing that never left him since that night, that someone, somewhere, believed forgiveness was important enough to mark it, to leave it behind, to hope someone else would one day understand. Who lived here? The vanishing tenant. At first, the apartment seemed like any other unit that had been left behind. The furniture was minimal. No decorations, no personal photos, no identifying documents, just the calendar. A worn couch, a dusty bookshelf with nothing but a phone book from 1993. The kitchen had no food, but the refrigerator still hummed, as if waiting for someone to return. The faucet dripped slowly. The blinds were drawn, and the air had a strange stillness, not stale, but suspended, like time itself had been paused. The explorer, now obsessed, wanted to know who had lived there. The first question was simple: who was on the lease? So he went to the building manager, a man named Reggie, who had worked there for 22 years. Reggie was reluctant to speak at first, claiming that unit had always been a problem. He referred to it as the quiet one, said no one had paid rent there in at least a decade, but the door had never been forced open. No complaints had ever been filed. It just existed. When asked for a name, Reggie hesitated, then checked a yellowed folder from the 90s. The name on the original lease: Al Ardent. No first name, just the initial. No contact number. The lease was signed in June of 1991 and renewed once. Then the paperwork stopped. There was no forwarding address, no emergency contact, no cancellation notice, no eviction. Legally speaking, the tenant had never left. But physically, the apartment had remained untouched for years. The explorer began canvassing the neighboring units. The first door he knocked on belonged to a woman named Sarah, in her late 60s. She remembered someone living there. A woman, she thought, quiet, polite, always wore the same long brown coat. She said the woman used to leave early in the mornings and come back after dark, carrying grocery bags, but never speaking to anyone unless greeted first. But when he visited the apartment on the other side, the neighbor, a man named Devin, insisted that no one had ever lived there. Not once, not in the 15 years he'd rented his place. She always thought someone was there, he said, gesturing toward Sarah's door, but I never saw a soul. Just a light that came on at night. Sometimes, not always, two neighbors. Two completely different versions of reality. The explorer pulled property records. No one named Ardent had ever owned the unit. He searched phone directories, birth records, obituaries, nothing. The name didn't exist. The mystery deepened when he looked at the building's security logs. Reggie, skeptical at first, eventually agreed to let him see archived footage, most of which was stored on old tapes. One of them, dated from December 1999, showed something unusual: a figure entering the apartment. They were wearing a hooded coat. They carried nothing. They used a key. They went in. The camera timestamp showed 6:14 p.m. No footage ever showed the figure leaving. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever. The camera continued to roll for the next 12 hours. No movement. No exit. The apartment's door never opened again. Another strange detail: utility usage. The electricity in the unit had never been formally disconnected, but it wasn't active either. A technician confirmed that the meter showed occasional spikes, tiny, infrequent ones, as if a single bulb flickered on briefly every few months. Gas? Turned off since 1996. Water? Still active. The explorer called the city to request a welfare check history. None had ever been filed. Not once. One anonymous tip in 2002 claimed strange whispers were heard from behind the door, but police never followed up. The building wasn't in a high-crime area. The apartment never generated noise complaints. It was too quiet to bother anyone. He posted about it online. Others came forward with memories or hallucinations. Some swore they'd seen someone matching the description of a woman in a brown coat near that building at odd hours. Others claimed they'd passed by the unit and felt watched. But the most unsettling account came from a former USPS worker. She said she used to deliver mail to that building from 1994 to 2001. Every year in early December, a letter would be placed in the outgoing box of Unit 3C, that apartment. Always the same envelope, no stamp, no address. Just one word written in shaky ink: forgive. She said she took it to the front desk every time, thinking it was a prank. Reggie never remembered seeing it, and just like that, the tenant became a myth. A ghost. Not one photo, not one signed form, not one digital footprint. Only a calendar, a memory, and a mystery with no beginning and no end. The explorer sat in the apartment again, quiet, alone, and asked the only question left to ask: if no one lived here, why does it still feel like they never left? Footsteps and flickers, signs of someone still inside. There are silences that feel natural, the kind that settle over a room like dust, soft and undisturbed. But then there are silences that feel like something is listening, watching, holding its breath. That's the kind of silence that filled the apartment. The urban explorer didn't want to admit it at first. He was rational, grounded. He had done this dozens of times, broken into forgotten places, chased rumors, filmed decaying architecture. Most of them were empty, devoid of any lingering presence. Just walls and weather and time. But this apartment was different. It was during his third visit, after the lease records, after the neighbor interviews, that it started. He had brought his camera, planning to document the unit for a short video. It was around midnight. He wanted the rawness of night. He set up his equipment, locked the door behind him, and began walking the perimeter with a flashlight. Then a sound, soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. A single footstep in the hallway. He froze. The apartment had only one entry door. No fire escape, no attic access, and he was alone. He stepped into the hall. Nothing. But when he returned to the living room, the calendar, the one thing that hadn't moved, was no longer centered on the nail. It hung crooked, as if brushed by a breeze or a hand. He reviewed the footage. Nothing. The camera, set on a tripod, had recorded static hums and soft ambience, but no movement, no shift, just the faint sound of something creaking once at 3:12 a.m. Still, he chalked it up to nerves. The place was eerie, yes, but he'd been up for 18 hours. Maybe he'd nudged the wall himself. Maybe the floorboards settled. He returned again the next night, this time with motion sensors. 3 infrared trip sensors placed at the hallway, the bedroom door, and the main entry. He recorded for 4 hours, nothing, until he reviewed the logs the next day. At exactly 2:03 a.m., the hallway sensor had been triggered, then again at 2:05, then again at 2:07. A pattern. Still, the video footage showed nothing. No movement. No flickers. No visual anomalies. Just that feeling. Like someone was in the next room, refusing to come out. Word began spreading online. Other urban explorers became curious. A Reddit thread was posted. A few locals messaged the original poster privately, claiming they had been in the building years ago and remembered something odd about the 3rd floor. One man, who delivered pizza in the late 90s, said he always hated dropping food off at 3C. No one ever answered the door. But once, when he turned to leave, he heard the lock click open behind him. When he turned back, nothing. Door still shut. No footsteps inside. Another claimed he stayed in the apartment during a brief sublet arrangement in 2006. He lasted 2 nights. He described a presence, not violent, not visible, but awake. He remembered lying in bed, hearing the soft sound of shuffling feet down the hall, always between 2 and 3 a.m. He thought it was a neighbor at first, until he realized the sound was coming from inside. He never got his deposit back, and he never slept with the lights off again. A woman shared a voicemail on the thread. Her friend, now deceased, had once recorded something strange during a ghost hunting excursion. The audio clip was faint, muffled, like it had been captured through layers of drywall, but you could hear it. A whisper, 3 syllables. "I'm still here." It sent the thread into chaos. Some claimed it was a hoax. Others tried to isolate the audio and enhance it. A few suggested it was the sound of pipes or echoes from another unit, but others knew better. The building had thick concrete walls, and no other unit had reported plumbing noises like that. The whispers weren't the only thing. The explorer began documenting light activity. His handheld EMF reader, usually useless in abandoned spaces, spiked near the bedroom door. Small surges, not dangerous, but precise. He moved it elsewhere. Flat. Returned to the door. Spike. He repeated the test 5 nights in a row. Same result. He replaced the batteries, swapped devices, brought a second reader. Both flared, always at the same spot, just below the doorknob. He placed a camera there. Let it record overnight. At 2:03 a.m., a flicker, just for a second. The hallway light blinked once, then nothing, but the EMF surged. He layered the data. It happened every single night, down to the minute. And that's when he realized something chilling. Someone or something was reenacting a moment, every night, at the same time. Same motion, same door, like a record stuck in a loop. A memory refusing to die. He began sleeping in the apartment, set up a cot, kept the cameras rolling, waited for more. And then, on the 7th night, it happened. He woke to the sound of breathing. Not his, not a neighbor's, but close. Inside the room. He turned on the flashlight. Nothing. But the calendar had fallen off the wall. Face down, and written on the back, in smeared pencil, were 2 words. Still waiting. Forgive who? The possible victim or the possible culprit? There's a reason the word forgive carries weight. Not because it's rare, but because it's personal. It's a word that never floats freely. It always points somewhere, toward someone. And if it was left behind, in silence, marked on a calendar, and whispered into empty space, it wasn't just decoration. It was a message. But to who? That was the question the investigator couldn't shake. After the 7th night, after the calendar fell, after the words, "still waiting," appeared on the back, he realized this wasn't just a haunting. It was a story left incomplete. He began to work backwards. First, he made a list, not of suspects, but of roles. Someone wrote the word, forgive. That meant they either felt wronged, or they were the one who had done the wrong. Victim, or perpetrator. The tone of the handwriting didn't help. It was neat, rounded, feminine, maybe, but rushed. The letters of forgive tilted slightly downward. Psychologically, some experts say that reveals defeat, a lack of hope. Others say it suggests surrender, not regret. He brought in a handwriting analyst. She spent a week examining the word and what was left behind. She noticed something most people missed, the pressure. The ink was darker at the start, fading toward the E. That meant hesitation, a slowing, almost as if the writer didn't want to finish the word. She offered 2 theories. First, someone was writing the word as a release, an attempt to let go of something they no longer wanted to carry. Second, someone was writing it to themselves, not as a command, but as a plea. Forgive. Not you. Me. That's when everything shifted. Because up until then, people had assumed the calendar was left behind by someone trying to speak to another person. But what if the word was meant as a confession? What if the apartment wasn't haunted by a victim, but by a secret? The urban explorer began to trace the possibilities. He started with the building's history, dug through old tenant logs, back when paper was still used. In 1994, the apartment had been rented to a woman in her early 30s. No partner on record, no children. Her name was Elizabeth Moreau. School teacher, quiet, paid on time, no complaints. She lived there until 1999. After that, nothing. No forwarding address, no official move-out. Her lease was terminated, but the property manager at the time filed no incident report. It was as if she disappeared, except for one thing. In 2001, a neighbor filed a noise complaint, not about music, about crying. They said it came from apartment 3C. Every night, around 2 in the morning, the document read, "It sounds like a woman sobbing. Sometimes it lasts for minutes. Sometimes it stops abruptly. But there's no one living there anymore." The police followed up once. They knocked. No answer. They checked the records. Apartment was listed vacant. They didn't go in. The report was closed as unfounded, but the sounds never stopped. Elizabeth Moreau was never officially declared missing, but no one ever heard from her again. No friends came forward, no family, no bank activity, no social footprint. It was like she was erased. The investigator contacted a retired detective from the district who remembered the name. He said Elizabeth had once reported an incident back in 1996. She believed someone was entering her apartment at night. Nothing was ever taken. Nothing was damaged. But she'd wake up to her kitchen drawers opened, her photos turned face down. Once, she said the calendar had a word written on it that she didn't write. That word? Sorry. The officer made a note, but no charges were filed. She eventually stopped reporting. But the coincidences were too aligned. Was she suffering from paranoia? Or was someone really inside? Then came the twist. The handwriting on the calendar, "Forgive," didn't match Elizabeth's signature on file. It wasn't her. Someone else wrote it, which meant someone else had access to the apartment. Someone who returned after she vanished. A friend? A stalker? A lover? Or the one who caused her to disappear? He brought in a forensic psychologist. She read through the case notes, reviewed the calendar, studied the energy of the space, the layout, the lack of struggle, the singular focus on remorse rather than fear. Her assessment was chilling. This wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. It was unfinished guilt. Whoever left that word didn't just want forgiveness. They needed it, and they didn't think they'd ever receive it. The room became something else then, not just haunted, but consecrated, like a shrine to an act never atoned. One night, while reviewing the footage, the investigator saw something new, just a flicker. A brief frame, a reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. It looked like a handprint, pressed against the glass, but it was inside the mirror, not on the surface. He paused, rewound, frame by frame. It was there for 2 seconds. The handprint was facing inward, as if someone was behind the mirror, trying to reach out. Right under it, in faint pencil, almost illegible, were 2 more words. Tell her. The explorer didn't sleep that night. He just stared at the mirror, and then at the calendar. And he finally asked himself what no one wanted to ask. Was forgiveness ever even possible? Or was this place cursed to echo with the weight of what was never said? The wall scribbles, hidden words beneath the paint. The walls in that apartment were never truly blank. They were quiet, yes, muted in their off-white silence. But they carried weight, stories, pressure. Something about the air made people breathe differently inside. The way light hit the corners felt ... interrupted. The room didn't echo like it should. It was almost as if the walls were listening, holding something back. It began with a scuff. One corner of the bedroom had a pale scrape across the plaster, a smear just above waist height, faint but deliberate, as if someone had brushed something against it with purpose, then tried to hide it. The urban explorer noticed it during his 4th visit. He was filming a segment on overlooked details, the way small inconsistencies could lead to larger revelations. That's when he paused near the window. His flashlight grazed the mark, and he saw it, a series of indents, like scratches beneath the paint. It wasn't just damage, it was writing. He turned off his flashlight and pulled out a blacklight. The beam revealed more. Across the wall, just below the layers of flat paint, faint words emerged, like whispers rising through silence. They weren't random. They followed a rhythm. The same phrase repeated 4 times. You said you would. The 5th was different. Why didn't you? The 6th was barely legible. I waited. The paint had been laid thick, too thick for a single coat. It was as if someone wanted to bury something. Not just hide it, erase it. He stopped filming. Something told him this wasn't for the camera. It was for the silence. His space shifted in that moment. What had felt like abandonment now felt more like containment. Someone had tried to seal something in or away, not with locks or bars, but with words buried beneath layers of white. He reached out to a restoration specialist, someone who dealt with historic homes and recovered wall writings from decades past. She arrived 2 days later, bringing with her UV gel, thermal readers, and layers of patient technique. What she uncovered shook them both, not just phrases, but paragraphs. The bedroom wall, when treated gently, revealed a partial letter, fragmented, scattered, but it told a story. I didn't know what else to do. The silence became louder than the truth. I tried to call. I tried to leave it on the tape, but I couldn't say it aloud. Forgiveness is a word people use when they want to forget. I don't want to forget. I want to remember, even if it breaks me. Then, a single line that was underlined 3 times. Please understand. I didn't leave. I stayed until I disappeared. The handwriting matched none of the known signatures tied to the apartment. A third person? A new voice in the mystery? The specialist found more behind the doorframe. These were older, etched into the wooden trim. Not written, but carved. The initials EM, then a gap, and then +R, followed by a heart symbol. Someone had loved here, or thought they had. The emotional weight of the room shifted again. The space wasn't just haunted, it was layered with intentions. Not all pure, not all cruel, but tangled, unfinished. The most telling moment came 3 days later. After a rainstorm, moisture crept into the wall and exposed what the thermal reader had missed, a shape embedded in the plaster, roughly square, just under the scribbles. They carefully chipped around it and pulled out a small metal box, rusted shut, wrapped in plastic. Inside, a letter, folded once, and a dried flower. The letter was addressed simply, to the one who stayed. It read, "You are never supposed to see this. But if you did, it means I never made it to you. Or maybe I did, and you never opened the door. Either way, I needed you to know. I forgive you. I forgive myself. I just hope someday you forgive the silence too. No name, no date, only a lingering smell, faintly of lavender, and a sensation in the room that things had shifted, as if a weight had moved, as if someone had finally said goodbye." The urban explorer sat in that room for 3 hours. He didn't film. He didn't speak. He just stared at the wall. The words revealed, the cracks now open, the truth breathing after so long. And somewhere deep inside, he began to wonder, was this a letter to the living? Or to a ghost who had never left? Because the silence, it still answered, not with words, but with presence. The strange noise at 2:03 a.m. every night. It didn't start with the apartment. It started with the building, specifically with the woman in 3B. She was the first to mention it. Not to the police, not to the landlord, but to a friend in a voicemail at 2:11 a.m. Her voice sounded tired, not afraid, just unsettled. She said it happened every night around the same time. A faint sound, like something brushing against wood. Then a thump. Then nothing. She thought it might be pipes, or maybe rats in the walls. But the timing was too precise. Always at 2:03 a.m., not 2:01, not 2:07, exactly 2:03, every single night. It was soft enough to dismiss. But once you heard it, it stayed with you. You waited for it, dreaded it, and somehow needed it to happen again, just to prove you hadn't imagined it. The building was old, built in the 40s. Creaks and moans were part of its vocabulary, but this was different. When the explorer slept in the apartment to film a full overnight investigation, he didn't expect anything. But his camera, set to record audio and motion from 1:45 a.m. to 3 a.m., captured it clearly. At exactly 2 hours, 3 minutes, and 17 seconds a shuffle, then a tap, then the sound of something dragging slowly across the floor. Rough, deliberate, like someone pulling an old trunk. And then a whisper, barely audible, muffled, but undeniable. A breath that wasn't his. He froze. He played it back 5 times. The audio levels confirmed it. The noise came from within the apartment, not from the hallway, not from another unit, from inside. He checked every inch of the room the next morning. No signs of forced entry. No loose panels. No movement captured on video. Just the audio, crisp, haunting, surgical in its precision. When he published the clip online, the comments poured in. One user wrote, "I live 2 floors below that apartment. I've heard that same dragging noise for years. My dog refuses to go near that part of the wall." Another added, "I used to date someone in that building. We joked about the 2 a.m. ghost. Now it's not funny." The story got traction. A sound technician offered to analyze the frequencies. What he found made everything worse. The whisper, when isolated and enhanced, revealed 2 syllables. Not clear enough to be speech, but close. He ran it through a spectral graph. A faint pattern emerged, waveforms matching human vocalization, low and slow, suggesting the shape of a word. It matched one entry in his database. Wait, nothing definitive. But something that once spoken or once felt was never meant to be loud. Something said out of desperation, or grief, or regret. The explorer returned to the apartment the next night, this time with multiple microphones. He positioned one in the kitchen, one in the bedroom, one under the floor vent. Again, 2:03 a.m. Again, the drag. Again, the breath. This time in the bedroom, but nothing moved. No flicker, no cold spot, no camera shake. Just that sound, like time folding in on itself. He cross-referenced city maintenance records. On a whim, he searched for any death recorded at that hour. Nothing. But then he noticed something chilling. The previous tenant, the one whose file was missing from the rental record, had checked into the psychiatric center across town at 2:03 a.m. on a winter night in 1994. That timestamp, written in pen on a form nearly 30 years old, now echoed in the apartment like a metronome for the forgotten. He called the center. They had no digital records from that period, but a nurse remembered the name. She remembered the woman's eyes. She remembered the word she kept repeating in the intake room. Forgive. What started as a sound now felt like a message. A routine. A replay of emotion trapped in time. Some say trauma leaves a residue, not just in people, but in places. The floor absorbs it. The air memorizes it. The walls rehearse it over and over, long after the body is gone. This wasn't a haunting in the traditional sense. It was a heartbeat, one that only came alive when the world was asleep. And as the explorer sat in that silent room, listening to the walls breathe at 2:03 a.m. again, he realized the question was no longer what made the sound. It was, Why is the apartment still remembering it? A name in the attic and a photograph that doesn't age. The attic wasn't supposed to exist. The building's blueprint, dated 1947, showed no mention of a crawl space above the apartment. No hatch, no ladder. Just insulation, air ducts, and wooden beams stretching between the fourth-floor ceiling and the roof. Nothing more. But something felt off in the bedroom. Specifically, the temperature. It was warmer in one corner, always, even in winter. Even with the heat turned off. The explorer noticed it first, while setting up a thermal camera. The top right ceiling panel glowed faintly warmer than the rest. Not hot, just alive. He tapped the ceiling. Hollow. He tapped elsewhere. Solid. Curiosity took over. He brought in a moisture meter, then a stud finder. The readings were inconsistent. Like a cavity had been carved above the ceiling. A space never registered, never claimed. One night, with gloves, a mask, and an oscillating saw, he carefully cut a square out of the drywall above the closet. Dust fell in waves, thick and gray. The smell was the first thing that hit him. Not decay, not mold, but paper. Aged paper. Dry and yellowed. Something stored and untouched for decades. He slid a flashlight through the opening. What he saw made him forget to breathe. It was a room. Small, maybe 6 by 8 feet. Floorboards exposed. A low roof. And right at the center, beneath layers of dust and time, a photograph in a wooden frame, propped upright, almost reverently. He climbed up. The floor groaned under his weight, but it held. Around the edges, there were boxes. Some sealed, some collapsed. A doll missing an eye. A rusted thermos. A pile of newspapers dated 1974. But the photograph, it stood alone. A woman in her 30s. Pale dress, straight dark hair. Looking directly at the camera. Not smiling, not blinking, just seeing. The moment he picked it up, the weight of the room changed. Like it had been waiting to be disturbed. He turned it over. Written in red ink on the back, "I forgive you." I hope that's enough. No name, no date, just that line. The ink hadn't faded. The paper hadn't yellowed. And the most unsettling part, the image hadn't aged either. Photos from that era, often warped. Colors dulled. Edges curled. But this frame looked like it had been taken yesterday and placed here on purpose for someone specific to find. He scanned the face into facial recognition software, ran it through missing persons databases, old school yearbooks, public archives. One result pinged. A file from 1979. Margaret Vale, age 32, disappeared from a psychiatric care facility 5 blocks from the apartment. Last seen wearing a pale dress. Family described her as emotionally distant, but not dangerous. Her case was marked voluntary departure, but what startled the explorer wasn't the match. It was the other match. Because Margaret Vale's face appeared again in a different file, dated 1996. Same face, same expression, different name. Catherine L. Monroe, and again in 2007, and again in 2014, each time under a new alias, but always the same photo attached. No signs of aging, as if whoever was responsible for filing these records had duplicated the same image over and over, or as if Margaret had never aged at all. He returned to the attic, hoping to find more, documents, letters, anything. He pried open one of the sealed boxes. Inside, hospital gowns. Stacks of them, all labeled with the same initials, MV. At the very bottom, beneath a layer of moth-eaten towels, he found a manila envelope. Inside was a transcript, typed, clean. It was a therapy session, the name redacted. But the words echoed something he'd already read. I thought if I just wrote it once, it would go away. The pain, the memory, a silence. I thought if I wrote it in red ink, like they told me to, it would break the pattern. The final line of the transcript sent chills down his spine. The calendar must stay on December. The word must always be visible. Or it comes back. No signature, no date, no explanation of what it was. But in that silent attic, above an apartment frozen in time, a chilling idea settled into the explorer's mind. What if the apartment wasn't haunted by a person, but by a promise? A promise so desperate, it refused to decay. A plea so unresolved, it carved its memory into wood, paper, and ink until someone answered it. He left the attic, but the photo didn't leave him. He kept it, locked it in a drawer. But sometimes, he swore, at night it looked newer, as if being seen gave it life. And the more he researched, the more he realized this wasn't about Margaret Vale anymore. It was about what she never got to say. The door that never opened. The locked room mystery. From the very first walkthrough of the apartment, something about the second bedroom felt off. The layout didn't make sense. There was a hallway with two visible doors, one to the master bedroom and one to a cramped utility closet, but there was another wall that extended far too deep. The math was wrong. From the outside of the building, the floor plan should have allowed for a third room. From inside, it seemed swallowed. At first, everyone assumed it had been sealed off, renovated, or perhaps lost to a structural shift over time. After all, old buildings carry scars, some visible, others buried in concrete and wood. But then someone noticed the airflow. The hallway felt colder when you stood next to that blank section of wall. Subtle drafts moved through the baseboards that didn't align with a solid wall. A knock test confirmed it. The wall rang hollow, unnaturally so. The explorer knocked again, harder, until dust floated free from the corners of the trim. It was a false wall. Someone had carefully bored it over once was a door. The wallpaper covering it didn't match the rest of the apartment. In fact, behind it were multiple layers, at least 3 different designs, as if someone had tried to erase the entrance multiple times over multiple years. And yet, the doorframe outline remained, a rectangle, silent but undeniable. They brought in a contractor. No cameras this time. No fanfare. Just the cautious curiosity of someone who knew too much and still needed more. It took less than an hour to expose the frame. There it was. A sealed door. Heavy, metal, industrial. The kind you'd find in hospitals or research wings, not residential buildings. It had been welded shut from the inside. Even more disturbing, a note was taped to it, yellowed and curling at the corners, but legible. Do not open. Not again. No date. No name. The team debated. Should they cut through? Call authorities? Leave it as is? But the explorer had come too far. A locksmith was called. Not just any locksmith, but one who specialized in vintage mechanisms and discreet requests. He examined the seal, confirmed the weld could be cut. They donned gloves, masks, and headlamps. Power tools buzzed, sparks flew, and then it opened. The air that spilled out wasn't rancid. It wasn't dusty. It was sterile. Inside, they found a perfectly preserved room. 4 walls, 1 bed, no windows. A single desk, a chair, a mirror facing away, and pinned on every available surface, calendars, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, pinned to the ceiling, taped to the floor, stacked inside drawers, all turned to December, all marked with the word, forgive, some written in pencil, others in crayon, red pen, marker, even carved into the wood of the desk. The explorer stood frozen. He filmed, documented, photographed, but nothing made sense. There were no personal belongings, no clothing, no trash, just calendars, And then came the scraping. A slow sound behind the far wall. Not loud, not urgent, but unmistakable. A shiver ran through every spine in the room. They tapped the wall. Silence. They knocked again. Scrape. Then a thump. They bolted. Once outside, breathless and white-faced, the explorer made a decision. Never publish the footage. But it leaked anyway. A short clip appeared on a forgotten internet forum weeks later. It showed only the door, the wall of calendars, and the faint sound of something dragging across wood. Some dismissed it as a hoax, a found footage stunt. But others, especially those who had followed the apartment case from the beginning, knew it was real. They'd seen too many threads. They'd connected too many names. And one of them, a user who never posted again, wrote a final comment. That room wasn't locked to keep people out. It was sealed to keep something in. To this day, the door remains open. The room untouched. Visitors report strange feelings upon entering. Dizziness, nausea, a heaviness in the chest. Some say the word forgive echoes in their ears long after they've left. One person reported seeing their own name scrawled on the back of one of the calendars. Another claimed to have woken up days later with the word carved into their arm. None of these accounts have been verified. But one thing is certain, that room was never meant to be found again. And now that it has, something is watching. The therapy files. A psychiatrist who disappeared. In the wake of the locked room discovery, the apartment was no longer just a scene of abandonment. It had evolved into a living document, one that told a story in fragments, through walls, calendars, and echoes no one could fully trace. And just when it seemed the trail might go cold, a small drawer in the bedroom vanity offered another piece of the puzzle. Tucked behind a warped wooden panel, invisible unless pulled from a very specific angle, was a thin, water-damaged folder. Inside, faded documents, folded envelopes, and a strip of cassette tape curled at the edges. Most of the writing had blurred with time. But stamped across the top of the folder, still legible in blocky black ink, were the words, Patient, Confidential Psychiatrist, Dr. Miriam Clowes, Last Session, March 1989. The name meant nothing at first. A quick internet search yielded little. No active licenses, no professional listings, no obituary, no known clinic. She had simply vanished. But for those who had followed the strange trail of the apartment's former tenant, the discovery of a psychiatric file held weight. It meant something had happened in that room, something more than isolation or regret. Someone had once tried to understand, to diagnose, perhaps even to help. One page stood out, a session note, scrawled hastily. Client expresses recurring guilt, tied to the day she never came back. Notes a calendar as a symbol. Mentions a locked room he cannot enter in his dreams. Strong fixation on the word forgive. Maybe experiencing visual hallucinations related to handwriting. Refuses to identify the girl. Mentions the sound at 2:03 a.m. nightly. Recommending deeper trauma assessment. Beneath it, client refused further contact after this session. Case left open. Who was she? Why wouldn't he say her name? What was the trauma so deep it shattered timelines, manifested symbols, and repeated itself in obsessive nightly cycles? More questions emerged. If Dr. Clowes wrote this note in March of 1989, why was there no trace of her professional presence after that date? Digging into archived newspaper clippings revealed an unsettling pattern. A small note in a 1990 Maine weekly paper referenced a missing woman, Dr. Miriam Clowes, age 41, last seen leaving her private practice clinic at dusk. No signs of forced entry or struggle. Office left untouched. File cabinet still full, it was reported quietly. No follow-up articles. No interviews with family. The case faded like ink on cheap paper. But the same address listed in the missing persons notice matched one of the return envelopes found in the folder inside the apartment. She had mailed something to that address weeks before her disappearance. What she mailed remains unknown. The envelope was empty, as if its contents had been deliberately removed. One of the video explorers, trying to dig deeper, found a phone number listed under an old landline registry for her office. He tried calling it. To his shock, it rang. Not a busy signal, not disconnected. A clear, echoing ring. And then a click, static, and a whisper. Not words, just sound. Like someone breathing through the line. After a few seconds, the line went dead. It wasn't until weeks later that another explorer, someone new, not part of the original group, claimed they'd found more notes hidden inside the wall behind the bathroom mirror. Torn pages, journal entries. They appeared to be written by Dr. Klaus herself. One read, "I cannot stop thinking about what he said, that the girl still visits him in dreams, that the room is real, that the calendar marks the day he failed to save her. He does not need a diagnosis. He needs a priest." Another was more cryptic. "If I disappear, tell them I forgave him." Even if she never did, the handwriting matched the note on the back of the attic photograph found earlier. And suddenly, a terrible possibility took shape, one that reached far beyond therapy sessions and broken minds. Had the therapist become part of the trauma? Had she been drawn into the same vortex of regret, obsession, and guilt that consumed her patient? Or was she the one who needed forgiving? No body was ever found. No records closed. No answers confirmed. All that remained was a growing sense that everyone who got too close to the truth vanished, some by choice, others by force, some perhaps by something we don't yet have the words for. And behind every disappearance, every document, every mark on the calendar, the same word kept echoing like a broken chant. Forgive, 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 but no one knew who they were saying it to anymore. Recurring word in missing person cases. Forgive. The discovery of Dr. Klaus's notes might have been the last turning point in any ordinary investigation, but this story had never played by the rules of logic or closure. It was not just the people connected to the apartment who had disappeared or cracked under psychological strain. The word itself, forgive, had started to show patterns far beyond the crumbling walls of that main apartment. The phrase was first noticed by an independent researcher, a librarian of all people. She had followed the story online, watched grainy footage from the urban explorers, and became fixated on the same calendar. What caught her attention wasn't just the handwriting or the date. It was how familiar that one word seemed. Forgive. She dove into the archives of the local police blotters and state missing person bulletins. Using public databases, newspaper clippings, and digitized files, she began flagging every case where personal items were recovered, but the person never was. And with growing unease, she found it. Again and again. In 1992, a 17-year-old girl vanished on her walk home from a church choir practice. Her diary was left open on her bed. The final entry ended with, "I forgive you." In 2001, a Vietnam veteran disappeared from his cabin. His last recorded phone call to his estranged brother ended with the words, "I don't want to die angry. Just forgive." In 1985, an elementary school teacher's home was left unlocked. She never arrived for work. On her kitchen table, a sticky note with a single word, "Forgive." None of these cases were connected geographically. None shared friends, jobs, schools, or blood. But every one of them vanished, and everyone left behind that single echo. That word, forensic analysts had no explanation. Handwriting experts noted that, in some cases, the word was penned by the missing individual. In others, it wasn't, but was still written on their property. It was as if someone else had signed the goodbye. And it didn't stop there. The researcher's findings went deeper. She expanded her scope nationally, even internationally, and found 14 more cases dating back to the 1950s, scattered across states and countries. Always the same pattern. Always forgive. A neighbor recalled a woman in Ohio who vanished in 1967. Her curtains were drawn for weeks. When police finally entered, they found her apartment vacant, except for a calendar in the kitchen, flipped to May. In the square for the 13th, someone had carved the word forgive with a knife into the paper. There was no online mention of this case. It existed only in microfiche files and whispered memory. What began as a mystery in one apartment had become something much larger, more like a symbol. A presence that floated just beneath the surface of countless disappearances, like an echo traveling through time and space, haunting the last moments of those about to leave everything behind. And still, no one could answer the core question. Forgive who? Themselves? A lost loved one? A perpetrator? Or was it something darker? A permission? An absolution? Granted before doing the unthinkable? Some suggested it was nothing more than a cultural coincidence. A tragic repetition in times of emotional collapse. Others, though, began to suggest a more chilling possibility. That maybe these people weren't just leaving voluntarily. Maybe they were being called. And the word forgive wasn't just an act. It was a threshold. A single word written before crossing into something, or somewhere else. Something that required no explanation, only release. And now, back in that main apartment, the calendar still hung, still turned to December, still circled, still carrying that word. It had been found again. But how many times had it been found before? In other places, other rooms, by other people who also began to unravel the same impossible pattern. The question was no longer what happened in that apartment. The question was, how far does this go? And what happens when the next person writes it? A church burned down nearby, and a survivor speaks. The town had almost forgotten the church fire. It was buried beneath decades of silence, stitched into the fabric of whispered stories and dusty photographs. The old red brick chapel had stood just 4 blocks from the apartment, a relic of small-town faith, built in the late 1800s, with creaking wooden pews and stained glass windows that bled colored light over the altar. By the time it burned, it had already lost most of its congregation. Services were infrequent. The record said lightning struck the steeple during a storm in 1973. The flames spread fast. No one was supposed to be inside. But that wasn't true, because someone had been. Her name was Lorraine Fessler. She was 13 when the fire happened, and for over 40 years, no one had heard her speak about that night, until she saw a photograph posted on a small online forum. A low-resolution image of a calendar found in a crumbling apartment in Maine. The same calendar you now know. The one with that word. Lorraine didn't comment publicly. She contacted the original poster directly. Her message was short. The handwriting looks like Father Nolan's, but he died in the fire. Or so they told us. It was the first time anyone had mentioned a priest by name in connection with the church. Public records said nothing about him. No obituary, no missing person alert, no official report. It was as if he had never existed. But Lorraine remembered everything. She was hiding under the floorboards of the confessional when the fire started. Not because of mischief, because Father Nolan had told her to. He said someone was coming, someone dangerous. He had pushed her into the crawl space, pressed a finger to his lips, and whispered, "No matter what you hear, stay silent. And if you make it out, forgive." Then the heat came. The sound of splintering wood, the smell of burning flesh, but also something else, chanting, low, rhythmic, in a language she didn't understand. It wasn't coming from the priest. It was coming from the altar. Lorraine blacked out. She was pulled from the wreckage 2 hours later, her hair singed and her lungs full of smoke. The authorities assumed she had broken in to hide from the storm. Her story about Father Nolan was dismissed as trauma-induced confusion. But now, seeing that calendar again, with the same sharp slant of the F, the looped G, the hard press on the final E, she knew it was real. She remembered his hand shaking as he wrote it. She remembered the thick marker, the old desk in the rectory. She remembered everything. Lorraine agreed to meet with the researcher. During the interview, she brought an item, a melted brass key. She claimed it opened a drawer in the church that contained files, records, letters, confessions. But the drawer was never found, not in the debris, not in the blueprints. It was as if the drawer had existed in memory only, and still she held on to that key. She placed it next to a printed image of the calendar, and with trembling fingers, she traced the word, forgive. And she whispered, he said it wasn't about sin. It was about silence. The interviewer asked her what that meant. Lorraine looked toward the window, her eyes glassy and distant. And then she said something that still echoes in the mind of anyone who's heard it. Some places don't want to be remembered, but they make sure the ones who leave never forget. The fire had erased the church, but not the story, not the presence, not the word. And now, in an apartment just blocks away, the same word had returned, written again, by a different hand, or perhaps by the same one. The calendar brand that was discontinued in 1995. It seemed like an insignificant detail at first. The calendar. Of all the bizarre elements in the apartment, the locked door, the fading photograph, the scribbled messages, why would anyone focus on the calendar itself? A mundane object, a throwaway, a backdrop to the real mystery. But one forensic archivist didn't see it that way. His name was Darren Malloy, a man who spent his life preserving printed materials, a specialist in discontinued print lines and analog artifacts. When the case researcher posted a high-resolution scan of the calendar on a private forum for historical archivists, Darren immediately noticed something that no one else had caught. That calendar wasn't printed after 1995. I'd stake my reputation on it. The paper grain, the ink type, the brand embossing on the back corner subtle, but distinct. It read Chronomark, a company that ceased operations in March 1995 after a fire destroyed their main warehouse in Maryland. Their printing presses were never recovered. The factory was gutted. The brand quietly disappeared from the market, absorbed by a larger publishing group who never revived the original designs. Chronomark calendars were known for a specific texture and binding, a kind of semi-gloss cardstock fused with an adhesive backing that allowed them to be hung without nails. Rare, even then. So how was one found on a wall in pristine condition? And how did it appear to have been recently placed? Darren asked for more images. He needed to see the adhesive residue, the wear on the page edges, the ink absorption on the date December 12th. He wanted to analyze whether the black marker had bled into the paper like it would have in 1993, or if it had sat atop the page, like something written much later on preserved paper. The results were chilling. The ink hadn't faded. It was too sharp, too bold. Darren suspected the word had been written no more than 5 years prior, but that would mean the paper had somehow resisted aging. No yellowing. No moisture warping. No foxing on the edges, a term used for the small brown spots that usually appear on paper stored in uncontrolled climates. It was as if the calendar had been sealed in a vacuum, or worse, as if time in that room didn't follow the rules. But the truly disturbing part came next. Darren dug into old Chronomark catalogs. He found an exact match for the calendar. The font, the layout, the border design. December 1993. It had been part of a limited-run batch sold in select regions of New England. Only a few thousand copies existed. He managed to locate another one from a collector in Vermont. When he compared the two side by side, something was off. Same layout, same paper. But in the collector's version, December 12th was a Sunday. In the apartment version, it was a Monday. A single-day discrepancy, but it broke all known logic. Calendars, after all, are fixed to the calendar system. A 1993 calendar can't be altered unless reprinted, and Chronomark didn't reprint anything. Then came the final revelation. Under a forensic light, Darren found faint impressions beneath the word "forgive," ghost letters, as if someone had started writing a different word. He made out the letters and they were scratched out. Why? Was the writer about to write family? Familiar? Famine? Was forgive the final choice after hesitation? Or was it a replacement for something too painful to name? That single word, placed so deliberately on a calendar that shouldn't exist anymore, now bore even more weight. Because it wasn't just a message. It was written on a temporal artifact, something that had no right to be there, still intact, still clinging to a date that refused to die. Time had collapsed in that room. Or perhaps something had preserved it for a reason. A message not only across space, but across decades. And now, with the origin of the calendar unraveling, one question grew louder. Who preserved it? And why did they want someone to find it now? The final voice message. "I'm sorry. I hope you see this." It came from the floorboards. After the locksmith had forced open the sealed room, and the forensic teams had swept the apartment, it was a final sweep of the living room that revealed a loose panel. The creak was subtle, but when someone stepped on it just right, it flexed downward and popped loose. Underneath, in the shallow space between floor and foundation, lay a dust-covered cassette player. It was old early 80s, yellowed with time, with worn buttons and a sticker on the side half ripped away. The battery compartment was rusted, but inside, miraculously, there was still a tape. It had no label, just a single word written in faded red ink on the shell. "Listen." The tech team hesitated before powering it up. Old tapes are fragile, and one wrong move could erase what little remained. So they used a high-end deck at the lab, digitized the contents, and enhanced what they could. The audio that played was crackled, broken in places, but unmistakably human. A woman's voice. It started with a long silence. 32 seconds of nothing but soft static and background hum. Then breath. Hesitant, like someone trying to muster the courage to speak after holding something in for too long. Then she began. "If you're hearing this, I guess I didn't come back." Her tone was flat, not lifeless, but drained. A kind of voice that has rehearsed the words too many times. The kind that's trying not to feel, just to speak. There wasn't going to be a note. I didn't think it would matter. I thought maybe silence would be enough. But silence is heavy, and it follows you. So I'm leaving this for whoever finds the mess. A click. A pause. As if she stopped the tape, then started again. It wasn't always like this. There were years when this place was full of sound. Laughter. Music. Him singing off-key in the kitchen. Her with her colored pencils scattered across the floor. We were a family. She stops again. This time, the static builds. There's a small shudder in her breath. Then December came. No context, no explanation. Just the weight of a season. I made a mistake. I held on to something I should have let go. And I let go of something I should have held tighter. The voice cracks. I thought forgiveness would come on its own. That time would soften the edges. But time, it just made the silence louder. And then, the words that would become the crux of everything. So I wrote it, on the day that mattered. I don't know if they'll ever see it, but I had to try. The voice lowers. I'm sorry. I hope you see this. Then silence. No name, no signature, no clue to who they are. The tape ends in static, then clicks off. Investigators would later enhance the background audio, isolate faint sounds, footsteps pacing, a creaking door, wind whistling through a crack in a window. One theory emerged. The woman recorded the message alone, late at night, in the same apartment that would later be found sealed and forgotten. But what no one could explain was the sound at the very end. Right before the tape cuts, there's a faint voice, not the woman's, a whisper. Some said it was the word forgive. Others heard found or home. No one could agree, but it confirmed one thing. The calendar wasn't the only message left behind. This woman, whoever she was, wanted to be heard, not just by someone who knew her, but by anyone willing to listen. Anyone who might take the message and carry it further. Anyone who might understand that forgiveness is sometimes all we have left, not for the ones we've wronged, but for ourselves. Is forgiveness eternal, or does it haunt the unfinished? The apartment is silent now. The calendar still hangs, untouched, unchanged. The sunlight that once streamed through its dusty windows has dimmed. Time has moved on outside, but inside, everything remains exactly as it was, frozen, waiting. The word forgive still stares from the page. For some, it was just a single word, handwritten in shaky script, easily overlooked. But for those who followed the trail through photographs that didn't age, through therapy notes hidden behind walls, through whispered tapes and scorched church files, it became something far more than ink on paper. It became a question, a challenge, a riddle of the human soul. Is forgiveness a moment or a process? Does it live and die with the one who seeks it? Or does it linger in rooms, in memories, in the things left behind? What haunted this apartment wasn't a ghost. Not in the traditional sense. There was no figure in the mirror, no footsteps that chased anyone out. What haunted this space was a feeling, a presence, the weight of something unfinished. Guilt is a powerful echo. It does not scream, it whispers. And when it's buried long enough, deep enough, behind enough closed doors and painted over truths, it doesn't go away. It waits, just like this apartment did. Every piece of this story, every hidden file, every name that vanished, every sound at 2:03 a.m. pointed not to answers, but to intentions, to the deep, unresolved ache of a soul trying to make peace with itself. Forgiveness, in this context, was not just an act, it was a last hope. A final gesture made not to absolve the past, but to acknowledge it, to face it, to put it somewhere on a calendar, on a tape, in a whisper where maybe, just maybe, someone else would understand, would finish what couldn't be finished alone. Some say that writing a word like that, in that place, means the forgiveness never came. Others say it was proof that it finally had, that by writing it, the author had done all they could. But there is one truth everyone agrees on. It mattered enough to be the last thing left behind. And in that, there is something sacred. As you step away from the story, from the apartment, from the silence still clinging to its walls, ask yourself, if the last thing you ever wrote could be just one word, what would it be, and who would you hope finds it? Some say forgiveness sets you free. Others say it chains you to the very thing you're trying to escape. But what if it's neither? What if forgiveness is a door? A door someone once tried to open in this apartment. A door they left ajar with that single word, written carefully, like a key waiting to be used. And maybe, just maybe, that door was never meant to open for them. Maybe it was always meant for you. So now, as the lights flicker once more and silence reclaims the room, the question is no longer what happened here. The question is, will you open the door? Or will it remain forever marked with a word no one dared to say aloud?